Welcome back, traders. This is part 5 of an instructional video series that describes how we configure workflow processes within both Strategy Quant X and Quant Analyzer to produce diversified systematic trend following portfolios for a 21 market Forex universe. In episode 4, we concluded the recency test step of the workflow process, where we sought to refine our robust collection of daily trend following breakout strategies to only include those that had also exhibited recent strong performance using a 5-year rolling look-back test. And in this episode of the video series, we will be concluding the description of the Strategy Quant X workflow configuration with final long-term robustness tests using all our available data. Now, once we have completed this workflow process, we'll then be able to turn our attention to Quant Analyzer, which does all the heavy lifting in regards to the portfolio compilation phase of this process. So these robustness tests we'll be undertaking simply use whatever long-term data we have available to throw at each strategy to identify whether any risk weakness remains in the solution following all prior tests undertaken. Remember that all these tests we've undertaken so far do not make any inference about future performance, as the future is uncertain. But these robustness tests are used to at least stress test each strategy and identify if any risk weakness resides in these strategies that have been encountered during past history. So the process we undertake is a similar process to that undertaken by car manufacturers, for example, whereby new designs are initially put through exceedingly stringent stress tests to ensure that all known risks arising from historic conditions can at least be addressed by these models. It is not stating that all risks are known, as there are always unknown risks just waiting in the future to test us, but rather our robustness tests are a method we use to assess the sensitivity of our models to known risk. So in our final robustness tests, we're going to throw all our available data at these solutions to see if they can still stack up and produce healthy risk-adjusted returns. So let's finish off this workflow process with our final robustness tests of this workflow. Our first robustness test uses all our available minute data that we have sourced from Dukascopy. So first we create the data bank, which I'll call the Dukas Full Data Bank, and then I'll create this task of the workflow. I will also copy the configuration settings we used in the prior recency test to this new step of the workflow. So as you can see, I've already created this task, so now let's look at how it is configured. In the What to Retest tab, I select that I want to test all the strategies located in the previous recency test and then store those validated solutions of this robustness test in the new data bank called Dukas Full. Now to the Data tab. For this robustness test, I want to use all my available minute source data from Dukascopy. You can see how SQX shows a complete range of available data in the data manager using this source, so I will use this complete date range in my start day and end day fields. So I select a start date of 1st of December 2003 for this robustness test using AUD JPY cloned minute data from Dukascopy, and I select an end date of the month end of the immediately preceding month to the current date of the 31st of October 2020. I use the highest level of precision for my testing parameters and adopt the default spread, which is derived from the data manager, which in this case is 1 pip or 10 points. That's it for this tab, so we can now check the other tabs. They should already be correctly configured, as we have already copied the configuration settings from the prior recency test into these tabs, but we just want to check. So we have selected 1 trade per day per strategy on the Trading Options tab, which is good to go. And over onto the Money Management settings, we have correctly used a $50,000 initial deposit and are using a fixed % risk allocation of equity applied to each trade, which in this case is risking 0.5% per trade. All the other settings are good, so far so good. We now also want to check that the cross-check settings are all inactive, which they all appear to be. So now we can move to the ranking tab, where we specify the validation criteria that each strategy needs to pass for this robustness phase of the testing. Now, given that we are testing over a long data history using this Ducoscopy minute data, we can afford to reduce the performance metrics used for validation. So remember, we are only looking for robust strategies with a weak edge in these solutions, as that is all we need to achieve through this workflow process. All the heavy performance lifting is actually achieved at the diversified portfolio level, but at this stage in the process, all we need to do is ensure we identify strategies with a weak edge. So the validation criteria I use for this step is a profit factor of at least 1.1 times, a trade sample size of at least 10 trades, and a Kalmar ratio of at least 0.1. That's it for this step. Now we move to the Notes tab and describe the objectives of this step in the workflow, save it, and we are done. Now I have already processed this Ducoscopy full sample step of the workflow, so let's have a look at the result. The test has been quite a rigorous one, which has significantly reduced our collection of strategies from 256 strategies following the recency step to 78 strategies following this long-term robustness test. Clearly, the unfavourable market conditions in the early years of this test negatively impact a large number of strategies in the collection. They were therefore discarded as a result. So now we only have one more robustness test to do to complete this workflow process. In this next step, we will simply now want to test our solutions against the complete data set we have available using the broker under which we'll be trading these strategies live under. We use Pepperstone for these purposes, and as discussed in episode 1 of this series, we have a very long-term data sample of daily data that we can use for this robustness testing. So let's set this step up. First, we create the data bank in which the solutions that pass this final robustness test are stored, and we call this the data bank Pepperstone. Next, we add this new task like previous examples and copy the configuration settings from the prior Ducoscopy full step. Now on to the What to Retest tab, where we select the data banks we wish to use. So in this case, we are now using the Pepperstone data source that we have previously loaded into the data manager. And you'll see that we have very long-term data available for this source, and I want to use all of it. So I specify a start date of 14th of December 1983 to an end date of 31st of October 2020. Now, given that I have only open, high, low and close data for this data sample on the daily time frame, I can only use the fastest, lowest level of precision test. But this is enough for our purposes, and I adopt the default spread of 1 pip or 10 points for AUD/JPY. Now that we've set this up, we can then check the configuration settings of the other tabs, as we've done in previous episodes, to ensure all is okay. So, all good so far. Now we can go to the Rankings tab. Like the previous tests undertaken on all available Ducoscopy data, we adopt the same ranking validation criteria of a profit factor of greater than 1.1, a trade sample of greater than 10 trades, and a Kalmar ratio of greater than 0.1. Now finally, onto the description to notate what this step is about. We save it, and we are done for this final step. So now, let's look at the result of this step once processed. From the original 78 strategies that passed the long-range Ducoscopy test, we now find that only 31 strategies pass this longer-term Pepperstone test. But these are the gold nuggets we have left to play with in our portfolio compilation exercise. So to summarise the entire workflow process so far, we started with 3,000 original breakout solutions developed for AUD/JPY on the daily time frame using the Build Strategies module. And we have rigorously tested for robustness and recency across two sources of data, namely minute data from Ducoscopy and daily data from Pepperstone. And at the end of this entire process, we are now left with 31 robust candidates that are also strong performers during recent market conditions that have passed all the validation criteria so far. So, where to now? Well, this is where we now turn to MetaTrader 4 and Quant Analyzer to finish off the process. But before we do, you will notice that I've included a final step to the process called Final, and this is in the databank. This is where we undertake a final cull following the analysis undertaken through MetaTrader and Quant Analyzer, where we then select the final solutions that we'll be including in our portfolio. But at the moment, this step is simply a cloned version of the Pepperstone full step of the process, but shortly we will be returning to this step and further culling solutions from this existing listing. Now, to create this final step, I simply create a databank to house the strategies called Final, and then add a new task and completely clone the settings of the Pepperstone full step to run this step. It is then simply a mirror image of the preceding step at this stage. So after copying the configuration settings from the prior step, I can immediately run it. And here we are, after having run this final step. You'll see that we have exactly the same number of solutions that have been generated as the prior step of this workflow, but we will be returning to this step in the workflow later to cull it down. Now, before we leave Strategy Quant X and undertake workflow processes in MetaTrader 4 and Quant Analyzer, we first want to create algorithms of all the strategies that have passed the test so far, so that we can use them in these alternative testing sources. Now, to do this, I refer to the Pepperstone full databank of 31 breakout strategies that were the result of the workflow process. Now I select all these strategies by clicking on the left-hand side of the listing in the checkbox, and then click on the Save function, which will drop down a list. I then select source code from this list, and this will give me a list of source code formats to choose from. And because I want to test these strategies within MetaTrader 4, I select MetaTrader 4 as my option from this list. This therefore allows us to create algorithms for use in MetaTrader. I will then be able to store those algorithms compiled from this listing in a folder of my choice. And I have already created a folder which I use to store these algorithms, and which I'll be testing using MetaTrader 4, and I call it Bulk for Testing. And in this folder, I simply save all the strategies here. So I click on Save, and then SQX will then create and store the algorithms in this desired location. So let's have a look at this folder and how the strategies have been saved. You'll notice that each file has been saved with notation that reflects the magic number of the solution. You will therefore be able to cross-reference these algorithms with the strategies located in the SQX databank. Okay, so now on to MetaTrader 4 itself. And here we are in MetaTrader. Now, just as general housekeeping, before we can use the algorithms produced by Strategy Quant X within MetaTrader 4, we need to load the SQX custom indicators into the MetaTrader 4 installation. You'll find instructions on how to do this in your Strategy Quant manual, but I thought I'd better mention it, as otherwise you may find that your algorithms derived from Strategy Quant X will simply fail to execute if you haven't undertaken this. Okay, so now we want to copy those 31 algorithms we have saved in our bulk folder into our MetaTrader installation and run the source code compiler. So I open my bulk folder and select and copy all the files. Then I open up the experts directory in my MetaTrader installation and then paste these algorithms into this folder. So now that I've copied all the folders, or all the algorithms into this Expert Advisor directory of MT4, I then can right-click on the Navigator menu, which refreshes the algorithms and compiles them. So there are 31 strategies to compile, so it might take a bit of time to do this. So just wait for the hourglass to stop processing. But when that's finished, we are now ready. So what we're going to do now as a final test of these strategies is to undertake backtests of those strategies developed within SQX within the MetaTrader 4 environment. And this is the environment where we'll be live trading our algorithms, so this test in the workflow process is used to eliminate possible execution issues when trading these strategies on our actual trading platform, and also to include any additional costs that we have excluded in the testing undertaken so far on strategy Quant X. For example, all the tests undertaken so far in strategy Quant X do not include holding costs, which we refer to as swap, which are a feature when trading leverage forex instruments. Now, these swap costs can become material to strategies if they have a very long average holding period. This is particularly relevant for our trend following strategies that could be holding trades for a number of years. So in this particular instance, swap then does become a very big deal to overall performance. And given that the swap costs can be so materially significant, it can actually turn a strategy with a weak edge produced by strategy Quant X into an unprofitable strategy when traded on the live platform. So this step in the process where we assign the impact of holding costs to the overall performance result is essential before we can identify strategies with an actual weak edge that we want to compile into a final portfolio. So by undertaking this final test using the MetaTrader 4 backtest engine, we are ensuring that the performance results produced from the backtest are more realistic and will more closely approximate live trading conditions. So this step in the workflow is conducted using the MetaTrader 4 platform, where we retest the strategies produced by SQX within this environment. Now, having undertaken a backtest using the MetaTrader 4 platform, we can then compile the performance results derived from these reports into Quant Analyzer to identify those candidates that we want to finally settle on as having the best risk-adjusted returns for use in our future portfolio. We can then return to strategy Quant X after we have selected those final candidates to finally cull the listing down to the final candidates. So let's get started generating more realistic performance results from each robust solution generated so far using our preferred live trading platform of Pepperstone within the MT4 environment. And we do this by quickly undertaking backtests of each of those 31 solutions. Just ensure that you are using the correct market and date range that was used in strategy Quant X. Apply the open process only method of testing, which is sufficient for our purposes. Select the daily time frame and the current spread. You don't need to use the visualization method in this step, as we have a large number of strategies to test, and we simply want to undertake this process quickly. We'll be looking at the trade results in a visual manner later as we get closer to the final portfolio compilation. Now, before we start the backtest, refer to the properties section and ensure that you are using an initial capital of $50,000 and are applying a 0.5% trade risk per trade. So all looks good now, so let's now undertake the test. The test is quickly undertaken, and having now derived a result, we can now save the backtest report into our bulk folder by naming the report using the magic number as the reference. So we have 31 of these backtests to do, and this process can take some time, but it is an essential step. But as you can see, I've already undertaken these backtests and have stored the MT4 backtest reports in this folder. So now that is done, we can now go to our Quant Analyzer software and load these MT4 reports into this software for final analysis. So that's about all the time we have for this episode, but in our next episode we will be showcasing how we use Quant Analyzer to assess the performance results of each solution and how we cull a collection to a desired number of strategies for inclusion in our final portfolio using their risk-adjusted metrics and their degree of correlation with each other. So stay tuned and trade well and prosper.